Hi, everyone, and thank you very much for tuning in. So today we're going to discuss about something that might sound like technical economics, but it is not. Because economics, as everything in life, is based on some simple principles and cannot escape fundamentals such as the law of causality, that something causes something else, and it cannot escape some very basic principles such as the one that Ayn Rand uses when he says you cannot have your cake and eat it too. So I learned personally that economics and ideas have actual consequences the hard way, because I come from a country, Greece, which for many decades we believed that no, there is no such thing as the law of identity. There is no such thing as the law of cause and effect. There is no such thing as a law that says that, well, you cannot consume more than you produce. So we thought that we had found a way to overcome these things. The result was the great crisis around 2008, and the result is me now being in the cloudy UK, an immigrant, because the Greek economy was, you know what happened. Anyway, so what if, though, what we saw in Greece is what now we see in a bigger scale throughout the world? And this time, there's a very seemingly good reason. And the reason is, look, we had the pandemic, we had the lockdowns, the economy was was suffering a lot, and therefore the governments had to do something. And what the governments did was throw money to the economy. And this could look like the stimulus packages we know. It could be the furlough schemes, which means that the government sends money to your employer so that they don't fire you, although you're not in work. It could be various schemes to help families, or it could be throwing money for sick leave and things like that. So things that we can understand on a first level, that yeah, people actually needed that. So since the beginning of the pandemic, the United States has spent around $4 trillion with a T dollars in various stimulus packages. Now, to put it into perspective, 4 trillion, how does it compare to the previous biggest example of spending, which was the 2008-2009 crisis? So during 2008-2009 crisis, with the Emergency Economic Stabilization Act, also known as TARP, in 2008, the government spent something like $500 billion. This was Bush. This was the conservative, right? This was the free market guy. And then supposedly the leftist guy came, Obama, and he spent something like $800 billion in the Recovery Act, which again included things such as some tax cuts, expansion of food assistance and employment benefits, throwing money to infrastructure and all that stuff. So during the biggest economic crisis of our, not only our generation, but of all of the previous generations till the 29 crisis, US spent something like 1.something trillion, and within a year of the pandemic and the lockdowns, it has spent almost 3 times that, or it has spent way more than that. Mathematics, by the way, is not my strong point, so I'll try to avoid big stuff. So what is 4 trillions? So apparently, if you stack $1 note, the 4 trillions is going to take you from the ground to beyond the moon. So we're talking about unimaginable amounts of money. And what is the context of this spending? The context of this spending is that the US government budget last year ended with a deficit of 3 trillion. This means the government spends 3 trillion more than the money it puts in the pocket. Now, in the UK, the numbers are a bit lower because also the economy is smaller. So the UK spent 400 billion pounds in stimulus programs, and the deficit is around 300 billion pounds. And of course, the debt to GDP ratio of the UK is more than 100%. So it kind of reminds us Greece leading to 2008, 2009, although some people say, actually, no, this is much worse. So why I threw these big numbers? because what is happening is unprecedented. What is happening is something that has enjoyed more or less bipartisan agreements, no question in the UK, but also in the US. So we are here today with a man of the market, but also a man who knows philosophy, who is interested in philosophy, who is interested in how philosophy applies to supposedly technical and neutral things such as economics, Jonathan Honig. So,
Thank you,
Jonathan,
Nikos.
thank you very much for being with us today. So, what is your first comment when you hear stimulus package and when you hear people saying, look, extraordinary times require extraordinary measures?
Well, I want to first give an extraordinary thanks to the Shadow Blade for the generous contribution on the super chat, to all of our super chatters, and especially the ones who throw us a couple of bucks. They, as you always say, Nikos, keep the lights on here at the Ayn Rand Center UK, allow us to bring these interesting topics for you, really rip from the headline topics, as you said, because stimulus are going to be our savior. We need stimulus. People on the so-called left pound the table here in the United States, and I think in the UK as well, and on the right as well. Back in 2008, as you said, the last biggest stimulus in history, there were some opposition, some free market voices, if you will, warning about the dangers of the stimulus, the immorality of the stimulus. Now you don't hear that really at all. I think objectivists are among the few mounting any type of a legitimate economic opposition, but certainly a moral opposition. So, for me, Nikos, that's where I start is, really what does this interest in stimulus come from? And I can see, maybe you can see a real direct line between the notion of stimulus and altruism. Not to mention terrible economics, really bad economics, but this idea that, what creates wealth? Well, obviously government spending, right? Government spending creates wealth. Government redistribution creates wealth. Government action, central planning in some sense, economic central planning, free markets, freedom, that's what got it into this mess in the first place, right? That's what effed us in the first place. It doesn't work. It doesn't work well. So, we need government to go big. They always say, spend more and more. We need them to allocate correctly. And as you alluded to, it takes so many different forms now that are unquestioned by anyone. There's the providing straight up aid, there's bailouts, there's tax micromanaging, there's lowering the interest rates to juice the economy. There's the big infrastructure here now thing. We're going to be literally digging holes. We're going to talk about it, filling them in again, priming the pump. And the bailouts, we follow a lot of what's going on, obviously, in the UK as well. But, look at some of the bailouts that UK citizens have already paid over this course of this pandemic. British Airways, hundreds of billions of pounds, Intercontinental Hotels, C&H Industrial, EasyJet, Ryanair, Bayer, and it all comes down, it seems, once again, to that idea that altruism, government has to do something. There's people in need, the economy's in need. Now, I have a great example here in the United States of an example where government did nothing and the economy actually blossomed. But I thought, just to set the stage of our discussion here, is stimulus a product of altruism? The idea that, well, we need to do something. People are in need, people are hurting, thus government or someone's got to get, or not someone, but government's got to get its checkbook out.
And actually, what you mentioned brought to my mind the usual criticism to these programs is that you give money to the big pockets. So the main person, the average, let's say, person would say, look, of course, we understand you need to give money to the people who are struggling, but why give money to Ryanair? Why give money to Bayer? Why give money to EasyJet? So, and actually, I've even heard objectivists saying, which totally makes sense to me on a basic level, that look, if you don't allow people to go to work, you have to somehow compensate them. So how do you see this argument that says that it's okay to compensate people, which within some particular context, it does make sense within a pandemic, because the government doesn't allow you to go to work, which is a different discussion. But since this is happening, you would say, yeah, okay, I understand. But what would you say to people who say, look, most of the money go to big pockets, therefore this is basically what they call it socialism for the rich. the handouts and the stimulus packages is socialism for the rich.
Well, I'll tell you, one thing that is not socialism for the rich is Mary Aline one of our wonderful super chatters who threw us $5 American. I don't know, the dollar's been pretty strong against the pound these days. So look, we'll take it all. Thank you so much for that, for helping inspire and fund these discussions. I mean, Nikos, to be honest, look, it's an injustice for government to force someone to stay at home, to force their business to be closed. Do they deserve some recompense? Yes, I believe they do. I think that should be hashed out in a court of law, not in the form of a so-called stimulus check. Where does the money come from? We're going to talk a little bit about that. Milton Friedman famously talked about that. There is no such thing as a free lunch. So all the money that the government magically just comes up with to so-called stimulus. Now, for one thing, that money is not stimulus. In fact, all that money tends to be malinvested. That's where the cronyism comes in. That's where the shady deals come in. I mean, you mentioned the 2008 stimulus bill. For years we talked here in the States about Solyndra. Now, what was Solyndra? You might remember the name. Solyndra was a green energy play that was funded by stimulus dollars under the Obama administration. That was basically like you could have taken $100 million, gone out to the parking lot outside, and set it on fire, and that would have been the same thing in effect of Solyndra. We don't have to relitigate that. But it's a tremendous waste of money. And here we are now, Nikos, once again, history repeating itself. We'll get into the nitty, ugly, gritty of it, but hundreds of millions of dollars of government spending. Because why? Not because of, as you said, this is recompense of wrongs, but because, well, government's got to fund the Green New World. Government's got to fund the energy infrastructure. Government's got to pay for the gas lines, I suppose, on some level. So, this idea that we need government to create wealth is, I think that's really the fundamental wrong idea here. And I mean, it makes ultimately individuals and individual choices as they're ignorant, they're ignoramuses. Like, individuals don't know what's best for themselves. We need government to organize all that material, organize all those choices. Even when it comes to something as basic as like in the UK, you're very accustomed to having something like the post office privatized, or various stretches of highway in the UK are privatized on some level. United States, we can't even get that far with infrastructure. So for us, it's all going to be central government spending. And not only is that immoral, but it's such terrible economics as well. And we're learning our lesson, this time to the tune of $4 trillion. I mean, I don't know if my calculator goes up that high.
Probably not. So, okay, because we're not an economy show, we're a show of people who try to use philosophy to understand the world. Let's put it a bit in philosophical terms. So the Krugmans of this world say, look, what you're saying about cause and effect and all that stuff doesn't apply here, doesn't make sense. So Krugman says, look, you people, and he refers to all free marketeers, basically. You say, you confuse the government with a company, or the government with a family. Now, it is true that a family cannot live beyond its means. A company cannot live beyond its means on the long term. But the government, he says, it's not the same. It doesn't exactly apply, because let's say if the government releases bonds, then these bonds is going to be in the hands of Americans. So it's not like a family is having, let's say, a credit card where you own to someone outside of the family. When the government releases bonds, which is usually what they do in some cases to finance all these deficits and all these programs, well, who cares? 50 years down the road, these bonds are being held still by Americans. So it's just we are helping our future collective selves. Does that make sense to you?
Well, I mean, it acknowledges on some level that money has to be created. Now, Biden is actually going to it can be printed, it can be borrowed, which is what you're talking about. Biden he's not shy, and he's picked a great enemy, which is those evil rich corporations. So the idea is that we're going to tax the corporations, and even that can be sold as it's a bait and switch, Nikos, because they say we're not taxing you, we're taxing the corporations. But as objectivists, what do we know? What is a corporation? It's just a group of yous. It's just a group of individuals. That's what a corporation is. So who pays for that corporate income tax inevitably? And, this is what's so great about economics is that Bastiat always talks about, what is seen and what is unseen. So they see the corporate income tax. What they don't see is employees making less, fewer hires, and customers paying more for the same goods. That's what the politicians don't see. That's what they know that you don't see. All they see is that the politician making the corporations pay their fair share. And I think it's the same thing when it comes to the debt as well. There's that sense of, oh, well, it's just owed to us. There's no net. And Rand always talked about the importance of studying history. And as someone who trades I always do the same thing. And I'll share my screen one more time if I could. This is bringing us back to the United States in 1920. The economic situation in 1920 was grim. Unemployment had jumped to 12%. GNP had declined dramatically. Herbert Hoover, who was falsely characterized as a supporter of laissez-faire, he urged Harding to do all kind of intervention, all kind of stimulus, right? But instead of stimulus, Harding cut the budget in half. He slashed tax rates for all groups. He struck down the national debt by a third. The Fed did nothing. So, this is referred to as the forgotten recession or the forgotten depression of 1920, because government did nothing. And as it's reported now, this is from the Intercollegiate Studies Institute, by late summer 1921, signs of recovery were already visible. The following year, unemployment was back down to 6%, a year later down to 2%. So, there's a great example of, you don't remember it because government wasn't stepping in altruistically to save the day, as against, again, quickly, just to pull from history here, look at Japan. These are actually some charts from intermarket forecasting. The Nikkei has been being stimulated, right? Japan has had, they literally built an airport. I need to Google this. They built an airport of which no one flew to for the first decade it was open. You can see Japan is a wonderful test case of hundreds and hundreds of zillions of dollars. I guess it's hundreds of zillions of dollars of yen, billions and billions of dollars of pounds and dollars to stimulate an economy and you can see it in those charts, Nikos, but you can also see it in what you described. Here's a young guy who had to move from Greece to get to Europe, to the UK, to get a real job. It's gone on in Japan for 20 years. That's the human stories, the real human toil that none of this economic shit actually describes, that only government can cause when they get involved in the free market, when they stimulate.
So you mentioned Japan. Let me mention Greece and the Olympic Games in 2004. So because in Greece, everyone, including the right, are basically what Mises would say, you're all a bunch of socialists. Anyway, so when we did the Olympic Games, it was completely unimaginable that any of these things would be private, obviously, like the stadiums and all that stuff. What actually happened is you have a lot of the infrastructure from the Olympic Games literally rotting. And I'm talking about buildings in the best part of Athens, buildings by the sea. In parts of Athens that it's, in my opinion, it's one of the 5 best spots in Europe in terms of being close to the city, but also close to a very beautiful sea. So this is what happens when the government spends money. The incentive is not there. The feedback is not there. So they can spend that money and basically, as you said, throw it out of the window. And just to throw something from one of my favorite things with Ayn Rand is, again, how she can integrate all these things and how she can see that, look, the same principles that are the basic same principles to apply to one thing apply to the other. So in Atlas Shrugged, there's a very beautiful scene. I cannot give too much context because it's a spoiler, but it's an economist, a professor of economics who, quote, couldn't get a job in the world because he thought that you cannot consume more than you have produced. So Rand presents him as a clever, productive person. But in the world where we live in, the idea that first you need to produce something in order to consume it is considered weird. And again, her usual phrase, you cannot have your cake and eat it too. We learned this in Greece in the hard way. I'm really, really worried that the rest of the world is going to learn this the hard way as well. And notice also something else. When the government basically runs your business with you, you're going to find it soon biting you in the back. So what happened in the UK in the summer, towards the end of the summer, the government introduced the help out to eat out scheme. This basically means you would give some like 15 to 20%, something like that, of every meal in some particular days. The government would pay. So Jonathan, you would go to have a meal. The cost would be £20. Government would pay £5. So this is, and of course, people said, look, you destroyed the economy, the government destroyed the restaurant industry, they had to do something. Now, basically, what has happened is that
just to say how many bad things have come because you say, well, we've got to do something. Government's got to do something. How many times that led to just such a terrible outcome over and over and over again?
Yeah, so this comes together now with the fact that the government might tell to the pubs, well, you cannot have someone unless they have a passport, a vaccine passport, although the jury's still out of that. We don't know if it's going to happen. But what I'm saying is these things never come without, there's always a catch. When the government runs your business with you, there's always a catch. And when the government gives...
Yeah, so the old saying is, he who writes the checks makes the rules.
Exactly. And actually, you mentioned that there is no free meal. Do you want to say something more about that? Because for people who had that meal in the summer, they're going to find out in one way or another.
Sure. Well, and first of all, thank you, Christopher, for your contribution, your super chat. Bonnie Bertrand says, quote, helping people in need now in order to create more people in need tomorrow, not a good plan, however you slice it. It's true. It's impractical and it's immoral. And in fact, the airline subsidies are a great real-time example of that. Massive unemployment numbers were announced for the airlines a couple of weeks ago now, months ago now, right up until the point that we paid billions of dollars to keep those planes flying in the air during the height of the pandemic. So, it's that malinvestment, Nikos, that you alluded to, that you talked about. Here's a few examples that the Foundation for Economic Education pulled for at least the U.S. stimulus: $10 billion to create a civilian climate corp. I mean, so I mean, and to your point about their civilian climate, so they're going to be pushing a climate agenda. Obviously, $20 billion to advance racial equality, environmental justice. I mean, that's a lot of money. $20 billion. Billions for electric vehicle subsidies. $100 billion to make school lunches greener. So there's a tremendous, terrible crowding out of private money, waste of private money, and indoctrination when you start to have all this money being able to, tell you how to build your schools, what to feed your friggin' kids.
If you think that this is going to have any effect on making better the bad racial thinking that is happening around today, I have a bridge to sell you. Actually, no, let me take it a step further. It's going to make it worse, because actually this sounds like one of the things that's going to promote racial thinking. So it's going to pave the way for the racism of tomorrow, which is, as we said in the Monday's episode on critical race theory, which is unfortunately bringing back racial thinking from the window, as we say in Greek. But anyway, that's another topic.
I want to share just a few good ideas for some of our viewers and listeners of places to get some good ideas about economics. Ayn Rand's Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal. For me, I vacillate back and forth between that and Virtue of Selfishness as my favorite. Well, yeah, of course, my favorite is Textbook of America, because that's like, but definitely pick up Ayn Rand, Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal. Pick up Dr. Brooke and Don Watkins' Pursuit of Wealth. Read John Allison's book about the free market cure. And one that I don't hear enough about that I really liked is Brian Simpson's Markets Don't Fail. So, and in one's advocacy, I would say, and Nikos, I don't know if you ever respond, encourage for government to do nothing, to stay out, to let weak companies fail, to let the private enterprise and all of its glory actually work. They're not going to listen to us, not this time, but that should be our goal. Right.
That should be our goal. And again, my message to the viewer is everything is interrelated. No area in life is isolated, and no area is inoculated from principles. No area is inoculated is isolated from the law of identity. No area is isolated from the law of cause and effect. So if you don't care about philosophy, philosophy is going to care about you down the road. If you don't care about economics and politics, economics and politics are going to care about you, which is why I'm not in sunny Greece and I'm in the UK.
Yeah, but I mean, honestly, Nikos, doesn't the UK have such a history of, I'm not an expert in UK's economic history at all, but like, didn't they bail out like Rover in the 70s and 80s? And then DeLorean, weren't they on the hook with DeLorean? I mean, it just seems like the UK is not learning its lesson over and over. You know,
well, the UK
had feel like, well, government has to do something to save these jobs.
Actually, in the late 70s, the UK was the then Greece of Europe. But something happened in 79, a prime minister who won 3 consecutive elections. Everyone hates her today, including her own party. Unfortunately, they don't hate her, but they haven't understood what happened with the Thatcher revolution, but that's probably for another show.
All right, well, this was, I think, a great education for us all, and a reminder that stimulus is really anything but, interventionism is anything but helpful. And as you said, I mean, it's a great opportunity to return back to those principles on which wealth is created for the so-called uber rich and for everyone else in an economy writ large. Okay,
so what are our parting words to our audience for the weekend? So first of all, remember, by becoming a member of ARC UK, you have access to members-only courses. So today, there was one more session on the reading group on With a Living. Tomorrow, on Leonard Peikoff's course, The Art of Thinking, we have the 4th course. Now, this is philosophy applied to life, as good as it gets. So we're not discussing abstract theories. No, we discuss how objectives can really apply to one's life. More exciting announcements coming up. I don't want to hype it because it's so good it cannot be hyped enough. The person in charge is texting me no spoilers. Yes, I'm not going to say anything. He will have the honor to bring good news to you when the time comes. But what I'm saying is there is zero reason not to be a member of ARC UK. Membership starts from as low as £10 per month. You get access to all this. You get access to the WhatsApp groups where we discuss everything from politics, sports, fitness, dieting, and I don't know what they discuss in the other groups because I was mostly in the politics and the fitness group. You get access to the Productivity Hub. We had, last week, we had our session on public speaking, on effective communication. So there's all these things happen, and this is based on the work of a few people, and mostly thanks to your support and to the fact that you are there as viewers, as people who, gives us a kind word, and also every now and then also support us with some money, which obviously is needed to continue. Anyway, we are off to Clubhouse to continue the discussion with you and give you the floor. Jonathan, thank you very much, and see you all soon. Bye-bye.